Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. So I welcome you to the second part of Ode to a Nightingale, a famous poem by John Keats. I am Jahanzeb Jahan and I am teaching you English poetry 18th and 19th century. So in this video lecture, we'll be talking about the critical appreciation of the poem. Since we have already gone through the text in the last video lecture, so this video lecture is more about the critical appreciation, in which we'll be talking about the main themes, the prominent ideas that are developed. We'll also talk about the poetic and literary devices that are used by John Keats in making this sublime piece of literature. So it was written in 1819. So it was the month of May, and Keats was at his friend's home where he was sitting under a plum tree in a garden. So there he listened to the sound of nightingale, and it was almost a valley where he was sitting. And after listening to the sound of nightingale, he was so engrossed in that sound that he was lost in imagination, and then he straightforwardly went to that imaginative level where he was with nightingale, and then in the end he comes back to the word again. So it is a travel, and it is important about John Keats that he goes from the real word to imagination, and then he comes back from imagination to the real word, and then he keeps going. So he does not stay at some particular position or particular place. The tone of the poem is quite changing. When the poem begins, Keats is happy because he feels that Nightingale is happy. And since he himself is happy, the tone of Nightingale seems happier to him. And then we read in the poem that since he is becoming sad while listening to the sound of nightingale, and by talking about his own miseries, and by comparing his life to that life of nightingale, then he feels that the sound of nightingale is also changed. And then when he talks about his own death, the same song of nightingale becomes his death song. And in the end, he says, your plaintive anthem fades. So it is not the change of tone in Nightingale's voice that is changing. It is basically Keats' own mood. Keats feels the change within himself, and because of his inner self, he feels a change that is going on there on the outer level. Then Keats talks about the immortal bird. He says that the bird is immortal, the bird is born to be living forever. So here Keats does not mean that this particular nightingale will live forever. Keats knows this, that every nightingale must be having an average age of 10 to 15 years maximum, and then it will die. But he says that nightingale is the essence and the part of nature, and that essence can never die. Essence will always remain the same, intact. It cannot perish. Human beings cannot trample down this. Humans have always tried to trample down the natural objects or sceneries, but nature can never be subdued by human beings. So since nightingale is the particular essence of that community, so nightingale will never die. And then weather. So the weather that Keats is talking about is somewhat chill, because he's talking about England, where he's sitting, and then he's sitting in a valley where he's talking about the nightingale. So, and plus it is a time of night, so everything is adding to the chillness of the time. Like it is getting cold, and Keats says, though he's sitting outside, he's forgetful of the cold outside, since he's so much absorbed in the word or the life of nightingale. Ode to a Nightingale is a Horatian ode, and that is written in iambic pentameter. So we must know what Horatian ode is. The Horatian ode is Latin descendant of Aeolic ode, both of which were written to project a tranquil contemplative tone meant for meditation. Both retain purpose and formality of all odes. However, the Latin descendant attributed to Horace in 20 BC is better preserved. So, the Horatian ode is simply a stanzaic form in which all stanzas are structured in same pattern at the discretion of the poet. For example, rhyme, meter, number of lines, etc. More technically, it is a non-stanzaic or a homostrophic ode, which means ode made up of same structure stanzas created specifically for that poem. So, the poet can create alternations in this. The poet can change the poem structure according to his own willingness. So, we find that all the stanzas are structured same. So, this is a Horatian ode and it is in iambic pentameter. So, iambic pentameter is this is about a line which is having 5 meters. So, pentameter means 5 meters, and there are 5 meter, and in each meter there is a stressed or unstressed syllable. So, the poet has used, John Keats has used iambic pentameter and Horatian ode technique in his composition of Ode to a Nightingale. Keats talks about his imagination. Keats is so much particular about his imagination that he feels himself to be with Nightingale soon after the second stanza. Though he is not there, but he is his imagination is so powerful that even being not with the Nightingale, he feels himself to be around her. And he feels that he's into that very forest, the forest dim, over which the nightingale is flying. He can even see the moon there. He can even smell the flowers. He can even see the things in the jungle, though it is embalmed darkness there. So Keats is feeling everything. He is using his imagination up to that particular level that he can go into the dark, he can fly with the nightingale, he can look at the essence of the nature, and he can even feel the change in the tone of nightingale. So this all comes from the imagination of John Keats. So his imagination is the strongest one. When he talks about his imagination in Ode on a Grecian Urn, then he becomes very much a part of that urn, and he feels that all the pictures are moving. He can even listen to the sound of the music, which is practically not coming. No sensual ear can listen to that tone, but he says, heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, but to more endeared. So here he means that I can understand you. I am now a part of you, and I can listen to your sound, which is of no sound basically. I can listen to the sounds which cannot be listened by anyone else. Then Keats makes a comparison in the Ode to a Nightingale. Basically, he is making a comparison between his life and the life of a nightingale, between the miseries that human beings are facing and the life which is enjoyed by a nightingale, between the diseases suffered by the human beings and the fretless life of nightingale, between the worries of all the men and women and the pain-free or disease-free life of nightingale. So nightingale is altogether enjoying its life. Nightingale is essence of nature, and nature cannot perish. Nature is immortal. Human beings are mortal. And Keats says the same thing, that nightingale is all the time singing, and she's all the time singing with the happiest tone, and she's all the time using the top of her voice when she's singing, when she's welcoming the spring. But human beings, on the other hand, they are in terrible plight. They do not sit together, and whenever they sit together, they just sit to listen to each other's worries and each other's ailments. So this is what they are always talking about. So there are several places where he is making a comparison between the transient human world and the immortal natural world. or the temporary human life, or the permanent natural life. So there is altogether a comparison which goes till the end of the poem. Now Keats begins with the poem with a complaint, and the complaint is that he's having a kind of ache in his heart, and that is only because of the happiness that he cannot absorb, that is coming from the nightingale. And then he is giving you Greek references. Since these romantics, they were much interested in Hellenism and the Greek culture, literature, mythology and traditions, so they quietly or minutely used so many Greek words and techniques in their poetry that depicted their utmost love and fondness for them. For example, he talks about hemlock, he talks about leatherwords, and he talks about dryad, he talks about so many things which are taken from the Greek word. So if you have gone through the ancient Greek pictures, you will see that this picture or this poem and Ode on a Grecian Urn, these two poems are real depiction of Greece itself. Like we do not find England in this poem, we find rather a Greek word that is appearing through these poems. So Keats is a true representative of Greek culture. Then he's talking about his imagination. He says that I can listen to the sound of nightingale, that just like a light-winged dryad, like a wooden nymph, she's singing in the jungle, and she must be somewhere where there is lot of shade, where there are so many shadows, and nightingale is probably singing to welcome the summer with her full capacity of volume. So these are all the things which are assumed by John Keats. He doesn't really know it, but he's assuming it. This is his quality imagination, this is his height of imagination, that he's altogether assuming all this stuff. Then he talks about escapism in the second stanza. He talks about the negative and positive ways of escapism. He wants to go to the nightingale's word, and he gives himself ideas. So these are the ideas that he's not giving to the readers. He's giving these ideas to very much to himself, and he's telling them, yes, I can use Hippocrene, I can use vintage, I can use south and east wine that I can drink, and I can go from this word, I can leave this word unseen. So all these things are a kind of escapism or a source of escapism which he wants to use or employ in order to reach the word of nightingale. And again he's telling his own imagination that since he has never seen Hippocrene, because Hippocrene is said to be in Mount Helicon in Greek word, but he uses his imagination saying that those drops of Hippocrene will be so fresh that beaded bubbles must be winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. So after drinking Hippocrene, it leaves its stain. It's so fresh and pure that it leaves its stain on your mouth. So he is listening to all this, and he's imagining that the purple stains that are left on the mouth after you finish your jar or your glass. And then he uses alliteration here, beaded bubbles winking at the brim. So this is not only iambic pentameter, but also the use of alliteration that he's using. And then he says that I should be drinking all these things, and then I should say farewell to the word of human beings, and I should be part of the word of nightingale. And then he tells that why I want to leave this word. He's giving the answer to this question, that he says that this word is full of miseries, sorrows, and I should leave this word because this word is full of weariness, fever, fret. In case, or in other words, he means to say that all these things are non-existent in the word of nightingale. There is no concept of palsy, there is no gray hair, there is no growing pale, there is no spectre thin thing, there is no death because of being abnormally thin, there is no despair in the leaden eyes, there is no concept that beauty cannot continue in the eye of a person, or new love cannot happen. it can happen in the word of nightingale, but yes, it cannot happen in the word of human beings. Then, in fourth stanza, Keats seems to reject the idea of negative escapism. He again quotes the Greek references by using the name of Bacchus, who is Dionysius, the son of Zeus, the supreme god. And then he says, I'll not be going through the negative ways of escapism. I will rather use the positive ways of escapism. And using those positive ways, I'll go to the word of nightingale where I can be there. And again, he's using his high imagination or high quality imagination. He says the queen moon is shining, and the stars are dancing around her like fairies. So again, this is his imagination. He has not seen moon there. He's just thinking about nightingale's sound, but he's assuming all this stuff. He can also see the light coming through the vegetation of the forest. So this is his imagination. Then he guesses what, because now he is the part of nightingale. His imagination is now so strong that he goes there, and then he is able to guess. He takes the names of all flowers which he is sensing, he is smelling, and he says that I can listen to the murmur of the bees, and I can see the smell, or I can smell the roses or violet and all the flowers which bloom in this particular May month. So this is all about his thinking, that he is so much absorbed in the word of nightingale that he is feeling all those things which can be felt in a dark forest. In stanza 6, he says that I have always loved the concept of death. So here Keats is explaining that I am never afraid of death, but the sound of nightingale is so powerful that after listening to it, I am more in love with the concept of death, or I am now willing to die, because it seems that after listening to nightingale, I have gone through the extreme pleasure of the word. So he is comparing himself with a sword in the end, that if I cannot listen, if I am dead, my ears will not be able to listen to the sound of nightingale, but the nightingale will still be singing in the word. So again, he is comparing his mortality with the immortality of a bird. Then he says that nightingale is definitely immortal and it cannot die. And here Keats is using certain references of the past, where he also quotes a biblical reference of Ruth, who was ousted from her house when her husband died. So he is giving all the examples of people gone by, and he tells that they also must have listened to the sound of this particular nightingale. Here he means is that they all must have gone through the concepts or the beauty of the nature, and nightingales must have been singing in those times too, as now Keats is listening to the sound of nightingale. And then he says that there must be some place in fairy lands forlorn where nightingale's voice must have charmed some window to open. And when he used the word forlorn, this word brings him back to the word. He again realizes that the word of nightingale is full of happiness and pleasure, because he feels that the word forlorn, that was so powerful word that brought him back from the word of nightingale to Keats' soul self. This word brought Keats back from his imagination to his reality, to the very place where he was ill himself, where he saw his brother dying, where his girlfriend left him, where he was all alone, where he was having his materialistic misery and poverty. So the word forlorn brought him back, and then he says that I cannot be no more charmed, and he uses metaphor, deceiving elf. So he attributes nightingale as deceiving elf, who is famed to deceive people. So rather he is blaming nightingale. He was himself charmed by the voice of nightingale, but he is now blaming nightingale for this reason. And then when the Keats wake up in the end, or he feels that he was sleeping, or he is unsure rather whether he was sleeping or waking up, he seems that or he feels that the sound of nightingale is going beyond the hill, and then then furthermore, and then the sound of nightingale is deep and varied. So here Keats means that he is no more listening to the sound of nightingale. He says that the sound of nightingale in the end was a plaintive anthem. So this is not the like sorrow in the sound of nightingale. Sorrow is there in the mood of John Keats. So in Ode to Nightingale, first of all, Keats used alliteration. Alliteration is a repetition of consonant sounds in the same line, such as the sound of the in that thou light-winged dryad of the tree. So this that thou, this sound comes twice again. So when the combination of consonant sounds occur, that is called alliteration, and Keats has used this alliteration many times in the poem. For example, beaded bubbles winking at the brim, this is also the use of alliteration. So alliteration is a device that makes your poetry supreme and strong, like it gives a power, a player to the poem, and it gives a player to the reader, in fact. So whenever we are reading the poem and it comes alliterated words, we tend to enjoy it. For example, how high his honor holds his haughty head, this is alliteration. One who fails to understand the understood is understandably out of my understanding, this is also alliteration. So alliteration is all the time making the work beautified, glorified, or basically it gives a pleasure to the ears. It makes the poem or words or sentence melodious, that thou light-winged dryad, or beaded bubbles winking at the brim. So these repetitions of the same consonant sound make the sentence more better, more melodious. Now, simile is a figure of speech used to compare something with something else to make its meaning clear. Keats has used this simile in the last stanza. Forlorn, the word is like a bell. Here the poet is comparing forlorn to a bell. So simile is again a literary device that the poets use, and Keats is also using this literary device in Ode to Nightingale when he talks about the word forlorn in the second last stanza and the last stanza as well. And then he says, forlorn, the word is like a bell that to toll me back from thee to my soul self. Now he is comparing the word forlorn to a bell. So bell is just like an alarm clock which wakes a person from his imagination or dreams. So in the same way, forlorn was a word that worked like an alarm clock that told Keats back to his natural world, where he was living with his sufferings and his own single self. So this is the use of simile. Then enjambment. So enjambment refers to the continuation of a sentence without a pause after the end of a line in a couplet or a stanza, for example. So this is there is no pause when we are talking about enjambment. My sense as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. So here we see that there is no break. So he's being so curious about telling all those things that he has gone through or sharing his experience that he does not stop somewhere. Then imagery. The use of imagery makes the readers visualize the writer's feelings, emotions, or ideas. Keats has used images to present a clear and vivid picture of his miserable plight, such as thou of hemlock I had drunk, past the near meadows, fast fading violets covered up in leaves. So here the poet is using his imagery, that he is watching all those things, he is feeling all those things. Like he is in darkness, but in the darkness he uses his imagery, and he comes to know that he can see the flowers. He can guess them, he can see them, he can see them changing the shape. He can also see, or he can feel, the intoxication produced by hemlock, and he can also listen to the sound of nightingale that was first flying over his head, then on a bit distance, then over near the meadows, then over the hill, and then the voice disappears. So this all comes from his high imagination. Then assonance. Assonance is the repetition of same vowel sound in the same lines of the poetry, such as the sound of O in some melodious plot, and I sound in the voice I hear this passing night was heard. So there is a repetition of same vowel sounds like O, E. He's using the repetition of these particular sounds. So some melodious plot. The sound of O is constantly occurring. This is assonance. So metaphor is there when he says attributes Nightingale as a deceiving elf. And for example, there's furthermore metaphors which are used in the poem. The first one is in line 11, for a beaker full of warm south. Here he compares liquid with a southern country weather. That since it is having warm weather, so the wine from that warm weather is of high quality. Personification. So personification is to give human qualities to non-human things. Keats has used personification in line 29, where beauty cannot keep her lust for size, as if beauty is human and can see. The second example is in line 36, the Queen Moon is on her throne. So personification is a literary device in which we give human attributes to inhuman things. For example, if I say that the crops were dancing, so crops cannot dance, human beings can. Or if I say that the moon was dancing in the air, or the sun was smiling, the moon was feeling sad, all those things cannot be attributed to these objects since these are human emotions. So if we attribute human emotions or attributes to non-animate things, this is personification. So when he says that beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, certainly beauty is not some a person, it is an abstract noun. So abstract noun cannot be having eyes, but since he is giving this reference to it, so it is use of personification. Then he compares moon with a queen who is sitting on a throne. So moon cannot sit on a throne, rather a queen can, a human being can. So this is also the use of alliteration. Then anaphora. Anaphora means referring back. So in linguistics, we use anaphora as referring back to some particular subject which we talked about. It refers to the repetition initial words of sentence in sequence or in the whole stanza or even in the poem. Keats has repeated the word where in the following lines to emphasize the existence of his imaginative word. For example, now when he talks about his own word, he says that I belong to a word. He is telling this to a nightingale, and he means to say that I come from that word, or I am John Keats, and I belong to such a word where palsy shakes a few, sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes. So he is giving reference of that ancient talk that is just done of the previous reference. So here this where is anaphoric reference. So where is being used as anaphoric reference by John Keats, and is expressing this to attribute to that place from where he has come. So he tells Nightingale that you are living in such a world where these things are never happening. I come from that world where all these things happen. So in a way, he compares his own life and his miseries of life to that life of Nightingale. Then apostrophe. An apostrophe is a device used to call somebody from afar. The poet has used this device in line 61. Thou wasn't born for death, immortal bird. So this is not apostrophe of grammar, this is something else. Here he means to call the bird in a way that you are not born for death, immortal bird, in a way that he is calling, or he is attributing Nightingale, he is calling it from afar, and Nightingale is not in front of him, but rather he is addressing him from a faraway side, and he is speaking this dialogue to the nightingale. Stanza is poetic form of some lines. There are 8 stanzas in this poem with 10 lines in each stanza. Since it is Horatian ode, so the poet has certain license to form the structure the way he likes. Rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, E, C, D, E throughout the poem with iambic pentameter. End rhyme is used to make the stanza melodious, such as the first stanza. The rhyming words are pains, drains, drunk, sunk. Internal rhyme, it is a rhyme within a line, such as in the line to turn me back from thee to my soul self. 2 words, me and thee, rhyme with each other. So they are the example of internal rhyme. And iambic pentameter. So it is type of meter consisting of 5 iambs. The poem comprises iambic pentameters such as my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. So these bold ones are the stressed ones, and those regular ones are unstressed ones. So these were the devices that Keats employed in Ode to a Nightingale. Themes. So first of all, we have versions of reality. So one version of reality is where Keats is living, and one version of reality is where Nightingale is flying. So Keats is watching the Nightingale's version from his own eyes, and by watching that version, Keats realizes that this is the perfect version of the utopian state, of idealistic state where human beings can live happily if Nightingale is living happily. So there's difference of versions of reality that Keats is having in his mind. Then there's immortality. The immortality of a bird is compared with the mortality of human beings. So Keats is talking about his own mortality and comparing to the immortality of nature. He says that the hungry generations could never treat thee down. That human being has been so hungry that the human has always tried to crush nature. We have always cut the forest. We have tried to burn the jungles, or global warming is there because of us. Ozone layer is disrupted because of us. So this is what human being is doing to the nature. But as you know that after 2 or 3 months of lockdown in nowadays, we can have a better view of our city. You can watch the videos on YouTube and you can see that how clear the atmosphere has become just because of less traffic and no factories and industries over there. Then beauty. Keats talks about internal beauty. So beauty is the concept which he gives to the nature, that nature is having the real beauty which is permanent, which can never have a fall, which can never come to an end, which is immortal, which is not transient, which is not temporary, rather it is permanent. So Keats is talking about his own world, where there is no one beautiful, where beauty cannot pine beyond tomorrow. It cannot sustain any longer. You cannot have lust any longer. You cannot be attracted to the people any longer because you are so much absorbed in your miseries. So he is all the time lost in the beauty of the nature and the beauty of the nightingale too. Since nightingale is the essence of the nature, nightingale is the representative of the nature for John Keats. And since Keats is the poet of beauty, he says that beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth, and that is all you need to know. So Keats, these are a hallmark of Keats' poetry, very beautiful lines that he uses in Ode on a Grecian Urn. He means to say that eternal beauty is something. Eternal beauty is everything which is to be looked after, which is to be cherished, which is to be used. The apparent beauty is skin deep, that is ship deep, that will sink one day, that will come to an end one day. The only beauty that is that cannot come to an end is the real beauty, which is the internal beauty, the beauty of nature, the beauty of permanence, the beauty of character. Then he talk about the escapism. So he says that he plans to use certain negative ways of escapism, but then he changes his idea. He says, when I have the capacity to have my thinking or my poetry, then why to use these hemlock and vines and the vintage? I should be using my poetry to go to the word of Nightingale. He also talks about the transient word of human being, where a man is never perfect, where a man cannot remain healthy forever, where a man cannot remain fit forever. A man dies in the young age. So this is transient human word. Then he talks about man and nature, that man has been the enemy of nature, but nature has never been affected by the man. Nature is always supreme and powerful. Theme of death is there, that Keats expresses his idea of death, that I am all the time impressed by death, that it comes to me on a midnight and takes my soul with no pain at all. So he is all the time ready to die. So Keats, since he was so much miserable in his real life, that he was in love with death, that he really wanted to die, he was not afraid of death. He talks about the miseries of humanities in this poem. So altogether this poem is a beautiful depiction of human nature and human life, and the natural world and the natural life. So he makes a comparison of both of them, and he gives his idea that human world is all the time inconsistent, and it is temporary. It is bound to come to a fall, whereas the natural world is permanent, and there is no fall in natural world. There is no downfall to the nature. Nature is all the time supreme, and it is all the time there. He gives the example of Nightingale as when calling Nightingale as immortal bird. Here he doesn't mean that this Nightingale will live forever. Here he means to say that Nightingale has been singing for ages, and it will keep singing. So this is the essence of nature that can never die. Rather, human beings will die. When he gives the example of human beings, that many human beings have listened to the sound of Nightingale, many emperors, many clowns, Ruth, or the princess who was there in a fairy land forlorn. So all the people have listened to the sound of Nightingale. Nightingale is still here, but people are dead. So this means that human beings are bound to die, but the nature and natural world is bound to live forever. So nature is the thing that was first created, and nature is the thing that will remain even after the human beings. So Keats is with a painful mood, he ends his poetry when he comes back to the word, and then he comes to again amid all the sorrows that he suffered. So I hope you understood the poem and the critical remarks or elements on that. Do write your views in the comments. Thank you very much.